You haven't just sort of thought, oh yeah, I'll have one of them, like pick them off the shelf because, you fancy having an LGBTQ plus child. You've there's a reason, there's a desire to support, nurture and give that young person, child, a loving home and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's quite helpful if people are thinking about, well, maybe I'd like to foster or adopt in a year's time, perhaps, because quite often it is a long, thoughtful process. Then, it's good to maybe put yourself into a position where actually you are engaging, post-lockdown, engaging with youth groups or local childcare or even, being regular babysitting for friends and family, so that you can invest that time to sort of build your experience now, which will make it significantly easier when the time comes.
Hey everybody, it's Sarah here and welcome back to the Queerpreneur podcast. This week's episode is such a special one. I'm talking to Yoni. And Yoni is a coach, an educator and trainer for foster and adoptive parents and caregivers. So in this episode, we're diving into the world of adoption and fostering, especially if you are, either LGBTQ plus yourself or you want to adopt or foster an LGBTQ plus child. And Yoni is talking to us about how she can help you confidently navigate the agencies and the authorities and the systems to ensure that you're able to represent yourself in a way that means you're matched with the right child for your family, but also to help you prepare for adopting or fostering a child. Especially around some of the LGBTQ plus issues or challenges that might arise. And also ensure that you're supported as a parent, that you're understood, that you are given all the sort of tools and understanding and the preparation that you need to be able to parent in the best possible way. Ultimately, that's what matters most, right? So I really, really love this work that Yoni does. It's so needed in the world. And if you're curious about fostering or about adopting, or you're in the process of doing that and you really would love some extra support, then please do check out her free challenge. It's on Facebook, in her Facebook group. The link is in the show notes. It starts on Tuesday, the 2nd of February, which is next week. And also check out her free Facebook groups. One is specifically for LGBTQ plus parents and caregivers. So all of those links to the challenge, the Facebook groups, how to contact Yoni are all in the show notes. Let's get on with this one. Hey everybody, I'm Sarah Taylor and welcome to the Queerpreneur podcast. This is the place for queer women who want to start or grow their business and their straight allies, where we build community, raise awareness and create a platform to celebrate incredible women leaders, change makers and trailblazers. In every episode, my intention is to share knowledge, learning and resources that inspire you to think big, create more impact and step fully into your life and business in a way that feels authentic to you. So if you're ready to take action towards creating a more equal world for everyone, then let's get started. Hey everybody and welcome back to the Queerpreneur podcast. And today I am talking to Yoni. And Yoni is an adoptee. She's also an adopted parent. And she's an adopted parent to 2 teenage girls with her partner. And she is the founder of an organization that provides training and support to adoptive and foster parents. And one of the areas that I know she supports those parents with is around LGBTQ plus children that they might be adopting or fostering, but also if they are LGBTQ plus
parents and they want to adopt or foster. So I am, really hoping that you're going to enjoy this episode and learn about fostering and adoption, I guess. If it's something you're interested in, or you know people that might be interested in it, then Yoni is absolutely the person that you need to know about and be talking to. So Yoni, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Sarah. Lovely to be here. Thank you.
Oh, it's really great to have you here. So the ways that I usually open my podcast episodes with my guests is to ask them to share their pronouns and how they identify. So if you're up for that, that would be great.
That's absolutely. I identify as lesbian, use the pronouns she and her, and also identify as Black British. So that's me, I guess, in the summary.
Yeah. It's interesting, actually. You made me think about the fact, I sort of asked that question about, how people identify. And of course, we identify as so much more than our sexual orientation or our gender identity. So thank you for adding that in. We're many things.
Absolutely. And I find sometimes some spaces want to encourage you to choose one or the other in preference, and that is, for me, very difficult. So that there's a real impact on who I am and how I am in the world.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you. So let's dive into your business. Okay. Your amazing business. How did it come about? Like, how did you get to where you are today in terms of the work that you do? What's your sort of background and what gave you the passion, I suppose, to do the work that you do?
Well, as you said in the introduction, I myself was adopted, and as a consequence of that, it's really it's been a strong theme in my career, both when I started working with young people and going on to work, do child protection, social work. So I've been qualified for 31 years now. And in that time, I've pretty much always worked with young people in one guise or other, but also been very much involved in fostering. And so I suppose it's something that is a professional passion, but it's also my view that the systems that I've been a part of have not always met the full needs of young people in a holistic sort of recognising each of their individual needs, because young people are brought into a system. Sometimes that system doesn't recognise the needs individually of young people, and I've also worked with young people from very diverse backgrounds. You sort of experienced some of the research which identifies that some communities are more likely to have their families intervened in, that some families will be more likely to have intervention from authorities than others, and sometimes those are not necessarily families that are the most that are struggling, but families that don't perhaps fit into stereotypes. And so diversity and inclusion has always been a really strong theme in what I do and what I wanted to do. And so I suppose all of those experiences and having sat on adoption and fostering panels for many years, I wanted to draw all of that experience together to perhaps have a bit more of an influence, because when you work within local authorities or in fostering or adoption agencies, there's a limit to how much you can influence. And so I felt, let's try to take a bit of a different approach and do that through business, rather than working within, but perhaps try to offer some resources to adopters and foster carers.
Yeah, so drawing on all of that experience and what you've seen, I suppose, and witnessed in terms of maybe some of the limitations, is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think so.
And that's kind of like, I'm sure, based on lots of different aspects, of the kind of care system and how it all works for young people and children. You've created your business now that can support almost beyond that. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think so. And I think what frustrated me somewhat is that children and adopters and foster carers get the support that the agency provides to them, and it's quite difficult for them to navigate if that agency sort of perceives that actually they don't need support around a particular issue, maybe to do with LGBT or race or ethnicity or whatever it is, or then it's quite difficult to access it. Whereas if there is somewhere where they can go that thinks about things that perhaps the agency doesn't think about or doesn't see, because the agency ultimately has a role in terms of assessing and approving households, placing children, and with hopefully the best outcomes. But in terms of a longer term dynamic, that sits with the home local authority of the household. And so I think that they're sometimes very much sort of motivated by getting the applicants through panel and matched, and maybe not thinking enough, I think, about the long term.
Okay.
And I think that's something that can be very helpful to just in terms of experience and information that's available.
That also sounds like, and maybe tell me if I've got this right, that the sort of potentially additional needs and support of something like LGBTQ plus children, or any minority group, I guess. That could be disability, it could be race, that they might not always be fully supported, those additional needs during the process. Additional needs, maybe not quite the right term, but you know what I mean, like that kind of like additional kind of like support that might be required. And then also there's something that you're able to sort of support with that with your clients in your business now, and then also like the longer term, really helping them to think about, and I think we'll probably move on to this actually, because I think it's something we talked about when we had a chat a couple of weeks ago, but like helping them to prepare and think about what support their child might need, being part of the family and them as well. So thank you. So what sort of different family kind of setups and things do you support the most, would you say?
I think, I mean, in fairness, I'm in sort of my first year really of doing the work. And what I've got is space for adopters and foster carers, and I've also got a space for LGBT foster carers and adopters. And probably inevitably there is an emphasis on fairly new adopters and foster carers, or people who are established in caring for children but want more information or perhaps experiencing some challenges. So we do sort of weekly live broadcasts around a particular issue within the Facebook group that I have, Ambitious Adopters and Foster Carers. And we've got one that's specifically for LGBT adopters and foster carers who get the same training, and that's what it's called. Happy to link it if that's okay.
Definitely put it in
your information.
We will put it in the show notes for sure.
But I'm certainly finding that agencies don't always. So, for example, I'm doing some one-to-one work with different adopters, and some agencies don't really understand the issues around LGBT relationships, perhaps norms within our families that perhaps might not be as well known by heterosexual middle class, white assessors. Also around trans issues, I know that people sometimes don't feel like the agency who's going through the assessment process fully understands those issues and how to assess in a fair and balanced way. And because adoption and fostering is obviously by definition done within your family, it's really important that the assessor sort of fully understands the dynamics of your individual family without imposing expectations of what their family background is like and sort of shoehorning their experience to decide whether your family is the right place for a child or not. So I think that can be quite challenging. And one of the things that I think for all adopters and foster care applicants is understanding that they also have a level of influence in their own assessment. And that's not to say that, you can go in shouting and sort of influencing. But I do.
That's not influencing, is it, really?
No, not really. But I do think sometimes adopters and foster carers feel very much like they're being done to, and I think that there is an element with which you can take some control in terms of your own self-learning and looking out for information and taking a bit more control back in terms of putting the best information in front of the assessor, so that perhaps talking to some people where perhaps the assessor and the agency is very unclear about trans issues. Well, is there information that you can get which will help them come to an understanding of how that impacts and how to how it might potentially impact on a child. But as as somebody who has brought up children within a same-sex relationship, there are things that you need to think about, and there are things that you need to talk about because we live in the culture that we live in, and sometimes having a child sort of brings you into connection with a lot of people that historically you wouldn't have anything to do with. In terms of teachers and parents and the people that are around your child's life, and sometimes that means that you need to think about how it's going to impact on the child. So both our girls had quite experienced some bullying in what we knew was largely a very understanding school. There was a LGBT teacher. They talked about equality, diversity, but still they really struggled at times because of having two women in a family. And if I'm honest, I did have some friends who were much more visible in their children's schools, and I think that had ramifications which perhaps sometimes were a bit unintended. And it's those sorts of things that you sort of need to have those conversations before you're confronted with the issue, rather, because my partner and I had different approaches in some ways, or potentially could have had to lots of things. And one of our most recent discussions was about the difference in parenting experience, and also how that then informs how you parent, and what what are your sort of bottom lines if you're in a relationship, and how that impacts on what you're going to expect of the child. And some of those sorts of discussions don't really come out of assessments in my experience, but I think they're really important to have. But you can't always rely on the agency who's really thinking about what's going to get through panel, not necessarily what do you need to talk about to be forewarned 5 years down the line.
No, that sounds like such a valuable service that you can give people. So just to sort of reflect on what I think you were saying there about the process, that sort of agency approval type process if you want to foster or adopt, and how I thought it was really interesting what you said was that, you know, a white heterosexual panel member, and, you know, no disrespect to them, but it's going to be hard for them to, potentially harder for them to understand, you know, what the experience might be of a couple that, or single person, I guess, as well, that wants to foster or adopt if they are from the LGBTQ plus community. And so I think what you were saying was that you support potential fosterers or adoptive parents to navigate through that whole process and to ensure that they are empowered almost to be able to influence that process, and that they can influence that process. They don't just have to wait for the answer, because you can provide them with information and resources and signpost them to things that will help.
And I think just by applicants feeling like they're not just this sort of passive recipient of the assessment, there are certainly some things that they can do that will, I think, reassure panel that and the social workers, and, you know, just as importantly, the matching social workers who will look at your paperwork and say, yes, I want this couple over that couple. If there is evidence that you've thought through and you're quite considered, because I think it very much speaks to the fact that you can evidence that you've gone away and got information and come back and adapted and been thoughtful, and that then will reassure them that in all likelihood as a parent you will be a good, thoughtful advocate, will go and get information about that child and meet their needs. And that's really what panel is looking for, you know. And, you know, obviously there's a range of things that you have to be able to evidence as a successful applicant. But one of the key things, I think, is that willingness to meet the child where they are, and to put yourself into their shoes, and that will take you a long way in terms of overcoming maybe other barriers or issues that might arise.
It's like going in with your eyes open, isn't it? And demonstrating that you're doing that, and then you know, that helps them to have confidence that you're going to do that all along the way. It's like a way that you behave and a way that you kind of commit to the kind of massive responsibility that it is, isn't it? My God.
Yeah, it is. And another common conversation that I'm having with people, particularly in times of COVID, but even outside of that, is how do I evidence that I have some experience with children? Because if they're, you know, alongside heterosexual first parents, how do you evidence that? Where do you enable, you know, to get that sort of confirmation and reassure professionals that that you are willing to sort of put yourself out there and to get that experience.
So you're adopting or fostering LGBTQ plus kids.
Yeah.
I suppose it's
Yeah.
like you haven't just sort of thought, oh yeah, I'll have one of them, like pick them off the shelf because you fancy having an LGBTQ plus child. You've like there's a reason, there's a desire to support, nurture, and give that young person, child, a loving home, and
absolutely. And it's it's quite helpful if people are thinking about well, maybe I'd like to foster or adopt in a year's time. Perhaps it's quite often it is a long, thoughtful process. Then it's good to maybe put yourself into a position where actually you are engaging post lockdown, engaging with youth groups or or local childcare or even being regular babysitting for friends and family, so that you can invest that time to sort of build your experience now, which will make it significantly easier when the time comes. Or also the other thing is that if it's not for you, then you find out before you invest a lot of emotional energy and time in something that perhaps doesn't end up being what you thought it was.
So say parents do then get through that process and they successfully get there something like a transaction. I don't mean it in transactional way, but that child goes and goes to their home, gets placed. I don't know if that's the right language.
It is.
With their new foster or adoptive parents. What sort of specific challenges, and you have touched on this, but I'm just curious to sort of understand for, let's say, heterosexual parents adopting an LGBTQ plus child. And it's actually, that probably doesn't make any difference, but you'll probably tell me this in a minute. Whether they're heterosexual, whether LGBTQ plus parents, actually, because what I'm thinking about is, like, I think what you were touching on is that experience of that child, and it might be different if they've got straight parents or if they've got LGBTQ plus parents and they're out, all of that stuff. It's like the kind of specific things that they really do need to kind of consider and think about with going to school, with the whole social circles and other kids, that they are going to need to, build their own little mini communities and all those sorts of things. And I guess, I suppose the question that I've got in my mind is, in a way, they already know that they're different because they're adopted or they're fostered. So, I'm just wondering about what your thoughts are on that sort of massive question. But whatever you think is useful for people listening.
Sure. I mean, I think it, in a way, like you say, in lots of ways, it shouldn't matter. The reality is actually that young people are more likely to be in care or homeless as a consequence of coming out, sadly. And I'm certainly aware in the authorities that I've worked in that there is a disproportionate number of young people who are LGBT or trans and come out and had to leave as a consequence for their own safety or being thrown out. So there's more as a proportion, in terms of proportions to the community, there's more young people in the care system.
What sort of age is there an age? I mean,
it's usually teenage years, sort of 14, 15 upwards, as young people are starting to, and it's usually not, I guess, that the family is really happy, really cohesive, and suddenly they come out and they're out on their ear. It's often there are other problems perhaps that haven't come to a head, that they come out and then I mean, that's that's the experience from the side that I've seen anyway. And certainly talking to Tim, the chief executive of the Albert Kennedy Trust, which is provides housing for LGBT homeless young people. Hugely disproportionate black young people being becoming homeless. So I guess there's layers of the family experiencing discrimination, and then that adding stress to the family as a whole. So there's a lot of young people who need some really positive homes, both within fostering and adoption. In terms of having that young person come into your life and into your family as an LGBT carer, I think there's lots of things that people will ask about. For example, how is that young person, whatever gender, going to experience the gender that's not immediately in your family if you're a single, if you're a couple. So it is important to think about that, because obviously boys need role models of men, and girls need role models of women where possible. But that's so it might be about sort of cultivating relationships or family dynamics, that they will have that access. But there is sometimes social workers sort of assume, because you're in a same-sex couple, you've never met any men. Like as women, they might have assumed that we had no men. For us, my partner has had a son and a daughter, birth son and a daughter, and he was 15, I think. So we had, and we've got family and friends. So it's worth thinking about that. It's certainly worth thinking about school, because I think in lots of ways, I mean, obviously I'm a social worker, and in social care, I like to think that people, are quite understanding and accepting of difference. But I certainly came across a lot more homophobia, or just insensitivity, probably more than really in your face discrimination, in when my kids went to school than anywhere else, probably.
What sort of things did you hear or feel? Or
I think it's just that the sort of exercises that sort of assume heterosexuality, assuming that everyone's able to come to events because the wife is at home and the husband goes to work and stuff, and that sort of quite stereotypical assumptions in the way that they organise school life.
Very admittedly
was quite, and that was quite a while ago. In fairness, and some of the parents as well. It's very much about parents linked to other parents who are similar to them, I suppose, and sometimes that can be a bit challenging. And you can, as a part of a community, you can be quite insular sometimes if you want to, if you choose to, as a single adult or as a couple. You can just be around the people who you're comfortable to be around. Once you've got a child, then it does take you into other communities, and you have to, to be supportive at sports days and events and things like that, where actually things are a little bit different, and you do have to negotiate that. And I think also we felt in secondary school that some of the bullying really wasn't addressed in a very proactive way, and some of that was race, some of that was around. I think both girls didn't feel able to talk about their home life throughout their secondary school because they didn't feel, having faced got experience of bullying in their primary school, that they would not have fared very well if they had have done, and that was sad. And I don't think that the school, which was a church school, was all that good at dealing with that.
Yeah,
that was a disappointment.
Yeah, so I suppose that's then less about the parents and more about the children and what they experience in terms of, you've got lesbian mom or something, that kind of bullying, and but children
I
can
guess,
be really cruel, can't they? And it's just
definitely
so awful.
I think, the children need the tools to navigate that, and they came to their own conclusions about what was okay and what wasn't okay. And some of that was, in all honesty, I was working away quite a lot at the time, so I was a bit more removed anyway, but that they didn't want us both to go into school at the same time. And that's a bit painful, but you have to honour, and respect their views and their wishes. What I wouldn't have wanted to do was to sort of go in and expect a positive response, because if it wasn't, then they would have had to deal with the consequences rather than us.
Well, we did mention it before we started recording this podcast, that you've just listened to my episode that I did with Emma Faye from Just Like Us, which is a LGBTQ plus charity for young people, and helps the education system, create more inclusion and more understanding and diversity and all of those things. And when I was talking to Emma, we were talking about the introduction of LGBT plus inclusive education. So, and that, I think one of the things probably I said then, and I'll say it again now, is it doesn't mean that all of a sudden everything's like amazing, and, just because that happens doesn't mean that everyone's attitudes and behaviors and things like bullying and stuff is going to stop. But over time, I really hope that I believe it will change things, but it's just heartbreaking, isn't it, that all of these things happen in family. It's not just the children, it's not just the parents, it's the whole family, isn't it? And the ripple effect.
No, I totally agree. And I think in a lot of ways, some of the very visible changes in terms of what's going on in America and some of the other countries that are going, becoming very anti-LGBT, then gives people, an atmosphere where also it suddenly becomes more acceptable or less socially unacceptable, and that will filter down throughout the community. So I'm really hoping today the transition is perhaps the start of something that is much more positive, because I think it, and coming back to the business, that's what I'm so passionate about, really, is that we're all individuals, and you only have to look at the sort of the negative consequences of not allowing people to be who they are, and it causes so much difficulty in terms of mental health and crime and disorder, and all of those sorts of things are at the root of them often because people aren't allowed or respected to be who they are and valued as an equal member of society. And so if we can put out little bits of information that enable people to think, perhaps to take a different perspective, then that's all good for me. I think it's so important in for us as a culture, but also in each individual family. And so we've quite recently we've been talking with my colleague Keely Crawl about play and the impact that play has within families, because it's something that we don't in social care, we don't talk about a great deal, but it's so fundamental that parents, particularly new adoptive or foster care parents, or where there are difficulties, they sort of carve out some time to sit down with each young person and spend some time play directed by the child.
Yeah.
And, you know, all the evidence is that really builds a strong bond, and, you know, the relationships grow as with even a very short investment of time, even an hour a week will make a really noticeable difference in terms of how that child is learning to communicate with you as an adult. And I just wish I knew that 19 years ago, because you know, the play is important, but we don't always think.
No, I think adults forget how to play, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I used to take my kids to the park, and they'd go off and play and do whatever, and I'd do, you know, sit watching them. But it wasn't that sort of engaging, sitting down and just doing something together kind of play that really has an impact. So we're doing we're going to be doing a live. So hopefully that's going to give people an opportunity to meet up with us online within the Facebook groups and play. So hopefully it's going to be really fun.
Yeah, so that's one of the important things we need to get people access to, really, that are listening, is like where you show up live and do your lives on Facebook, and the sort of training and things that you offer. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so in terms of if there's anyone listening that might be interested in adoption or fostering, you know, who can get in touch with you? What type of different family unit do you think? Because I know one of the things we talked about before we recorded this podcast today was that sometimes people think that they wouldn't be accepted, or that there's too many barriers and those sorts of things. So I'd just love to hear about, who you would most love to support and help, I suppose. I know you love to support and help everybody, but, you know, maybe some of those people who think, oh, I don't know if they'd even consider me, you know.
Yeah. I think I really enjoy supporting foster carers and adopters, even before they've actually applied. I could, you know, I've got resources around how to choose the right agency, you know, what sort of questions to ask, how to compare different agencies to get the right fit for you, because I think there's a lot of good agencies around, but some fit different people better. So, you know, if somebody's thinking, I'd like to do it, but I'm not quite sure where to start, then that's probably a good place to start. I also work with people who are going through the assessment, and we offer, you know, the online training. I'm developing, my next development will be a course on applying to adopt, and how to sort of what some of the things to think about that maybe an agency wouldn't tell you. So that's going to be something that I'm going to finalise in the next month or so. And also I do one-to-one coaching with people, either, and it's tended to be people who are perhaps going through an assessment but want a bit of reassurance or understanding about things to think about that might help them work through the assessment, because particularly LGBT couples and trans applicants can feel like they're not getting the full information that they need, and whether there are things to sort of put their best foot forward. And this is not, I can't guarantee the outcome of any panel, so put that out there. but what it can do is, having sat on adoption and fostering panels for over 10 years, I know what people will be looking for to some extent. And so there are some things that I can suggest that will help. And, you know, again, like we said earlier, it comes back to really largely putting yourself in the child's shoes and evidencing that. So can do that. And also we've got sort of two Facebook groups, one of which is specifically LGBT adopt foster, and that's a group for LGBT people who are either thinking about adoption, involved professionally in adoption or adoption or fostering, or currently fostering or adopting. And so we're building up a community really who are wanting to help each other, making connections, making links, and also some safe space really where I've found quite often adoption is very emotive, and online sometimes some of the communities can feel quite challenging sometimes, because there will be a combination perhaps of people who've had adults who've had adoptive experiences that perhaps weren't what you would have hoped for, and adopters. And I guess my concentration is really making the whole process better, and part of that is informed by my knowledge of what happens to children and young people where their birth family can't look after them and adoption has not been considered or has not been provided as an option. And I currently work with care leavers who have sort of aged out, as they say in America, but who are now 18 and living in, you know, starting to
remember you saying about that.
Young people who are sort of moving into independence. And while adoption has its drawbacks and has its challenges, absolutely, and some placements don't work, many of them do, and many of them do provide a secure family base. Whereas, you know, some young people's experiences of residential has been, you know, the day after they're 18, they're suddenly out in the world on their own with limited resources and support. And so I am still, and I know from my personal experience, adoption transformed my life for the better. Yes, it had challenges. I was transracially adopted, and that was, you know, something that was a challenge quite a lot in some situations, in terms of not meeting Black people at all for much of my childhood. But I do think it gives, when it works, it gives the absolute second best choice to staying within your birth family. So I suppose just linking to that, the other side of support that we can offer is, if people are thinking about transracially adopting or fostering, advice and support around those sorts of issues, things to think about. And I think that's going forwards, that's probably another area that we're going to do more training and
specialise in. Brilliant. Wow, I love all of that you're offering. So good. Really making a difference. So and what is it that brings you, to wrap it up, I suppose, the most joy about what you do? What would you say?
I think it's really meeting people and meeting people who are just really enthusiastic and really want to do the right thing by themselves, by their family, and most, you know, people who are interested, and my sort of link to me are those people who really want to do a good job in terms of parenting, and they really wanting to put themselves out, to learn as much as they can, are really enthusiastic and energized about bringing a child into their family, and they're just a joy to work with. You know, because you can really see that they've got so much to offer a child or a young person, and you know, could be really transformational. And so that's really, I love that, and I love meeting new people. So, and I'm sure you've got a lot of people in your audience who, you know, could, you know, might maybe haven't thought about it before, but maybe, maybe they might think about it.
I'm sure they will. I'm sure they will be. I'm sure there's people listening right now who, you know, are inspired by this conversation. And yeah, I think it's heartwarming, and there's so much hope, you know, and there is so much love and compassion that these young people and children need, and that we can offer them. So
definitely, I think I suppose one of the anxieties that I know a lot of people have is, you know, how is it going to work? Is it going to work? Is the child going to settle? How will they be going forward as they get older, and particularly teenage years? And I guess what I want to do is to give them some of those tools, and knowing where they can get more information. So actually we can put the building blocks in now to build that relationship. So actually the young person does feel really part of that family, but doesn't feel like they have to choose between, you know, wanting information about their birth family and choosing the adopters. So, and those sorts of things will reduce the likelihood of problems later on. They can't, you know, there's no guarantees, and young people have gone through trauma and challenge and loss as a consequence of being adopted. But the more you do early on, the better it will work out.
Of course. Yeah, and I really love that what you're saying there, because what it's making me think about is the fact that if parents are worried about that, caregivers are worried about that, to know that they're not alone. The support is there from you for sure, in terms of once you start that journey, you know, with that child in your family, ongoing support is available. That was what was coming into my mind. And I think, if anyone is just curious about it, they can come over to your free Facebook group. They can have a look. They can hear what you're saying. They can read what other people are saying, and get curious and see if it feels like something you want to seriously consider, because you're there for sure to help people. So it's been really wonderful to talk to you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. So can I just say, if people are interested in hearing more, then the best place to start would be the Facebook group LGBTQ Adopt Foster, or Google me on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter under Diversity Adopt. And we're doing the live on the 2nd of February. So if people get into the group, then they can be part of that.
Brilliant. Okay. I will make sure all of those links are in the show notes. I will ensure I've got them off you. And so people know where to find you. And 2nd of February. Okay. I'm going to make sure this episode is out on the streets before the 2nd of February, so that people get to connect with that as well, if that's something that you want to do. Thank you so much, Yoni.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much, Sarah.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, you too. Thanks.
Bye.